Carl Jung exposes why men obsess over women who leave, she left. But it was not merely her footsteps fading into the distance, it was the collapse of an entire cathedral built in the image of longing. She walked away, yes, but in her retreat, something far older was torn open. Not just a relationship, but a reflection, a mirror, fractured, splintered, now lying in shards at the feet of a man who once believed he knew himself. We do not cry only for the person. We cry for what we became in their presence, for what we saw reflected back, even if it was only illusion. And now, as her absence echoes like a hollow wind across the psyche, it reveals a deeper pain, one that predates her entirely. This is the ache of the soul's forgotten core, screaming not for her, but for the pieces of himself he unknowingly embedded within her image. When she turned away, she carried with her not just affection, not just memory, but a part of him. Or so it felt. And this feeling, that something of the self has been lost along with the other, is the first delusion, the first sacred wound of obsession. In the language of the soul, this moment is not ordinary grief. It is a symbolic death, a psychic dismemberment. For the Anima, the inner feminine figure that lives in the depths of the male unconscious, had taken her form. She had become its vessel. And when she left, the man was not simply abandoned, he was disarmed, unmoored, hollowed. He looks now into the space where she once stood, and sees not emptiness, but himself, half-formed, confused, aching. Like Narcissus, he had fallen in love with the reflection, and only now, with the water still, does he realize what he mistook for her was something much older. The lost child within him, the mythic Eve, the divine soul part he once banished in the name of strength. She had returned in her form, only to vanish once more. This is not madness. It is myth unfolding. There is a ritual death in being left behind. Not just by the beloved, but by the archetype she carried unknowingly. In her face, he saw salvation. In her presence, he saw purpose. But now, in the void she leaves behind, he sees something far more terrible. Truth. The truth that she was never meant to complete him. She was only the mirror. And the mirror has walked away. In Jungian terms, what has been shattered here is a projection. The Anima, his inner soul image of the feminine, had been cast outward, unconsciously onto her. This is not fault, not failure, but the psyche's longing for wholeness misdirected toward the external. The soul cries, not because she is gone, but because he had wrapped her in the sacred garments of his inner salvation. He mistook her for the missing part of himself, and now that she is gone, the soul has no choice but to speak. In dreams, she returns, her image now sharper, crueler, stranger. In memory, she flickers in scenes of laughter and closeness, only to dissolve into the silence of her departure. The mind replays, rehashes, rewinds, but it is not her the mind seeks. It is the self that was reflected through her gaze. She was the vessel, the mirror, the myth, and this is why obsession roots so deeply into the flesh of the soul. Because it is not just about her. It never was. She was a symbol, an echo of the Anima archetype, the eternal feminine that dwells within every man, whispering of unity, completion, mystery. In love, he projected this divine image onto her, unaware. In her he saw softness, wholeness, beauty. But what he truly yearned for was his own reintegration. When she departed, the projection collapsed, and the collapse of a projection is felt. Like death, there is something terrifying in the void left behind. Not only because she is no longer there, but because it reveals how much of his inner architecture was built around her imagined permanence. The illusion that she would always reflect back to him his worth, his vitality, his manhood. And now, the mirror is gone, and with it the persona he wore in her gaze. The ego now begins to unravel, and this unraveling is sacred. This is the beginning of a descent, a dark night of the soul, a journey into the unconscious terrain where the true feminine waits, not in another's body, but in the hidden chambers of his own psyche. But to reach her, to reclaim the anima within, he must grieve not only her loss, but the illusions he wove around her. Every obsession is a calling to descend, to follow the echo into the cavern, to sit beside the broken mirror and weep, not for her, but for the self he never fully knew. In mythology, the descent always begins with a loss. Orpheus loses Eurydice. Persephone is taken into the underworld. In every story of transformation, something is taken or leaves, and the hero is forced into the deep. This is not punishment. It is initiation. And in this sacred psychology, her leaving is not a cruelty, it is a summons. He has been called to face the parts of himself he buried in her smile, and now, without her gaze to validate his existence, he must decide. Will he collapse into bitterness, or will he begin the alchemical process of turning heartbreak into wholeness? But first, he must linger in the wound. He must feel its rawness, its blood. He must resist the temptation to numb it, to run from it, to chase replacements or distractions. For the wound, though agonizing, is intelligent. It speaks, it reveals, it guides. She has become the absence that teaches. Every memory of her is now a doorway to inner discovery. Every pang of longing is a thread into the labyrinth. Every ache is a signpost pointing inward. The obsession is not weakness. It is a language. The psyche speaks in symbols, not sentences. And the symbol of the departed beloved is one of its oldest messages, that the soul is ready to awaken. He may not want this journey. Few ever do. But it is here now. And it begins not with revenge or escape or forgetting, but with feeling, with sitting in the stillness of the space she left behind and listening to the echo, to the scream, to the quiet. And in that silence, something begins to stir. Beneath the obsession, beneath the sorrow, beneath the rage, there is something else, a presence, a watching eye within, the self, the deep center of the psyche, long hidden beneath layers of projection and persona. The self does not cry out. It waits, patient, vast, eternal, and as the man mourns the mirror that walked away, he may begin to sense this deeper presence, not in grand visions, but in flickers, in the sudden insight, in the stillness after grief, in the breath that comes when the tears have dried. The self does not mourn her departure. It blesses it, for it knows she was the catalyst. She was the one who unknowingly carried the key. Not because she was meant to stay, but because she was meant to leave. Because in her leaving, the man would be stripped bare, and only when stripped bare can the work of individuation begin. This is the great irony of the soul's path, that what feels like devastation is often revelation. She was the mirror. She walked away. Now he must look into the real one. It will not flatter, it will not soothe, but it will show the truth, and the truth is this: she was not the answer. She was the question. And now, at last, the man must answer it, not by chasing her, not by replaying what was lost, but by turning inward, into the dark, into the pain, into the image of the inner feminine he once projected onto her form. He must reclaim what he gave away. This is not forgetting her. It is reabsorbing her, bringing the projection home. This is the beginning of psychological rebirth. The old self, the self that needed her to feel whole, has died. Now begins the sacred work of remembering who he is without her, and perhaps in time he will not only stop obsessing, but will thank her, not for the love she gave, but for the emptiness she left behind, because in that emptiness the soul will speak, and when it does, he he will realize she was never the mirror. She was the one who broke it, so he could finally see beyond it and begin to see himself. Silence arrived not with peace, but with presence. It settled in like fog after a storm, thick, slow, refusing to lift. The world did not end when she walked away. No, something far more unsettling happened. It continued, but without her. And in the hollow echo of her absence, another voice began to stir, faint at first, barely perceptible, yet unmistakably intimate, a whisper rising not from memory, but from the depths, beneath thought, beneath longing, beneath the broken mirror of obsession. This voice was not hers. It belonged to another, to the shadow. Her departure did not merely open the door to grief, it summoned the parts of him long disowned, long buried. It invited the return of his inner exile, the one he locked away in the basement of his psyche, hoping no one, not even he, would ever hear its cry. But now the silence is a stage, and the shadow has begun to speak. At first, it mimics her, echoes her tone, her phrases, her criticism. It uses her absence as camouflage, but soon it reveals itself, not as her voice but as his own, twisted, neglected, forgotten, the part of him that was not acceptable, the one he had to hide to be loved. The obsession was never only about losing her, it was about the collapse of a defense mechanism, one built carefully over years of avoiding himself. She, unknowingly, was a buffer, her affection a balm that kept the darkness at bay. But now, in her retreat, the psychic veil is lifted, and what he sees is not romantic ruin. It is the unlived life. The shadow is not evil. It is not malicious. It is merely unseen. It is the hidden self, the sum of all he rejected in order to become who he thought he had to be. The sensitive child, the wounded teenager, the furious man, the needy lover, all the faces of shame, all the voices he silenced. And now they cry, out not in accusation but in yearning, to be met, to be known. The pain of obsession in this light is not madness, it is memory, cellular memory. The soul, remembering what it once pushed away. The shadow's cry is the cry of the forgotten self, raw, disfigured, desperate to be acknowledged. Her leaving did not create this cry, it revealed it, and so begins the second descent. This is not about her. It never was. She was the catalyst, the one who touched the mask with enough force to crack it. But the darkness that rushes through the fracture, that belongs to him, and it is sacred. In Jungian psychology, the shadow must be integrated, not destroyed. It must be faced, not as an enemy, but as a lost brother, a twin, formed in the darkness while the ego claimed the light. And like all twins of myth, it carries both danger and redemption. To deny the shadow is to remain incomplete. To merge with it is to be consumed, but to dialogue with it, to listen, to sit beside it in the ruins, that is the work of transformation. And so the man finds himself haunted not by her, but by himself. He sees now the rage beneath the grief, the jealousy, the humiliation, the powerlessness. He feels the smallness he tried to mask with bravado, the fear he tried to bury beneath romance. These were never parts she created in him. They were there, all along. She simply peeled the veil away. The obsession with her is a projection screen for a deeper confrontation. He is not chasing her. He is fleeing himself, or trying to. But the unconscious does not allow escape. It returns again and again in dream, in symptom, in sleepless nights. It returns through the shadow's cry. And what is the cry saying? Look at me, that's all. Just that. Look at me, not to fix, not to kill, not to shame. Simply to see. To turn at last and face the exiled parts with the dignity of presence. This is not easy. The shadow does not wear a gentle face. It comes in dreams of blood and confusion. in memories that resurface with sharp teeth, in sudden waves of despair that have no name. But beneath the terror lies truth, not the polished truth of intellect, but the raw truth of soul. He remembers now how often he pretended, how often he hid, how many times he smiled when he wanted to scream, how he performed the man he thought he should be, strong, composed, desirable, while burying the man he actually was. And she, perhaps unknowingly, loved the mask. Or maybe she didn't. Maybe she left because she sensed the lie. Or perhaps she saw more truth than he was ready to face. Regardless, her departure stripped the mask away, and the shadow stepped forward. In myth, the shadow is often symbolized by the monster, the beast, the trickster. Loki, Set, the Minotaur. But in Jung's teaching, it is not the monster that is dangerous. It is the man who refuses to admit the monster lives within him. To face the shadow is to stand before the mirror in which all facades dissolve. It is to see the hunger for control, the fear of weakness, the thirst for validation. It is to name them, not to condemn them, but to reclaim them. Because these aspects, once integrated, become power, not over others, but over the false self. Obsession begins to fade when the shadow is welcomed, because the obsession was its cry for attention. It was the psyche's way of pulling him back to his own depths. And so he begins to listen. He no longer blames her for his agony. He sees now. She touched a wound she did not create. She stepped into a labyrinth she never asked to enter, and when she left, it collapsed. Not because she was cruel, but because he had built too much of his identity around her presence. The shadow does not want her back. It wants him back. It wants wholeness. Wholeness does not come through perfection. It comes through integration, the meeting of opposites, the acceptance of paradox. He can be both strong and afraid, desirable and insecure, angry and loving. The goal is not to choose a side, but to hold them both, to allow the light and the dark to dance within the same soul. This is individuation, not becoming perfect, but becoming whole. And it begins with the willingness to sit with the parts that hurt, not to analyze them, but to honor them, not to dominate them, but to let them speak. The ego may resist. It prefers certainty. It fears complexity. But the self, the deeper, wiser self, knows that healing comes not through conquest, but through compassion. He sees now how he feared the shadow in her, too, how he wanted her to stay beautiful, tender, understanding, his light. And when her own darkness emerged, when she too became complex, unpredictable, flawed, it terrified him, because he had projected his own split onto her, made her the container of the sacred feminine, while he exiled his own. And so, when she shattered the image, he felt betrayed, but it wasn't betrayal. It was balance. She became what he refused to integrate, and in her departure the invitation arrived, to take it all back, to stop asking others to carry what we cannot bear ourselves. The soul wants to be whole, not comfortable, and so the obsession is the fire in which false selves burn. It is the forge where shadow becomes ally. It is the rite of passage through which the man becomes more than just a man performing manhood. He becomes a vessel for the self, not because he conquered the darkness, but because he sat with it, sang to it, let it cry, let it breathe. And in time, the shadow softens. It becomes less monstrous, more human. He sees the pain behind the anger, the longing behind the pride, the love behind the fear, and in that vision something shifts. He no longer seeks her gaze to feel worthy. He begins for the first time to see himself, not just the curated self, the whole self. He meets the one who was exiled for being too emotional, too needy, too much, too little, and he brings him home. This is the cry of the shadow, not for power, not for vengeance, but for belonging. It is the cry of the child left in the dark, calling for someone to remember. He remembers now, and in that remembering, he begins to return to himself, no longer chasing phantoms, no longer projecting pain. He walks back through the fire of obsession, carrying the fragments he once rejected. This is not healing as erasure. It is healing as reunion, and it begins with the cry, not her voice, his own, calling from the shadow and finally being heard. She was never just a woman. She was breath wrapped in symbol, a constellation of longing, a soul script written before he could speak. To him, she arrived not simply as another human being, but as a sacred figure, mysterious, radiant, somehow eternal. And in her presence, he felt something awaken, something ancient. Not love in the ordinary sense, but a recognition. A return, a homecoming that seemed to reach across lifetimes. But this was not just her. This was the anima, dressed in her skin. In Jungian psychology, the anima is the inner feminine, the soul image that lives within every man. She is not born from the outer world, but from the depths of his unconscious. She forms through his earliest relationships with the feminine, the mother, the nurturer, the seductress, the divine, but she evolves in the shadows of his mind, taking on archetypal proportions. And when he does not know her within, he projects her outward. He meets her in women, but he does not truly see them. Instead, he sees her, the anima, woven into their faces, their voices, their touch. She becomes everything, muse, lover, goddess, redeemer. And this is possession. Not by her, but by his own inner feminine projected onto the external world. She, the woman, becomes a canvas. Onto her he paints the myth, onto her he casts the dream. And for a time it feels divine. He feels alive, touched by something beyond language. But projection is fragile magic. It cannot hold forever. The real woman, finite, flawed, complex, inevitably begins to contradict the ideal. She says no, she turns away, she becomes human, and the anima, who seemed to live in her eyes, retreats like a spirit leaving a temple, and the man is left, haunted. Haunted not just by her departure, but by the vanishing of something he thought was sacred. He wonders, where did she go? Why does the world seem dimmer? Why does everything taste of ash? But it is not she who has left. It is the anima, the projected soul, who has returned to the unconscious, and now he must reckon with what he truly lost, not a woman, but the myth he wove around her. Possession is not evil, but it is dangerous. It blinds the soul. It creates dependence, not on love, but on the illusion of salvation. The man possessed by anima is not loving her. He is seeking himself through her. He is using her gaze to feel whole, using her presence to avoid his own inner emptiness, and when she leaves, the possession breaks, the temple collapses, and the sacred fire he felt burning becomes a cold, devouring wind. He becomes obsessed, not because he truly needs her, but because he does not yet know how to hold the anima within. He chases the echo, he worships the memory, he becomes intoxicated by what she once represented. He thinks she was it, the one, but it was never about her. It was about the inner feminine, calling to be recognized, held, honored. He does not want her back. He wants back the part of himself he projected onto her, but he doesn't know this yet. And so he ruminates, spirals, fantasizes. He replays every touch, every smile, every silence. He tries to re-enter the dream, but the dream is gone. And the psyche is clever. It does not let us return to illusions once they've served their purpose. The anima has withdrawn because the time for projection is over. The time for integration has come. The haunted feeling, the emptiness, the yearning, the unbearable ache is the soul's invitation. It says, come inward now. What you once chased you must now find within. But he resists. He fears that without her he is nothing. because he made her into his soul. He made her the flame by which he warmed himself. He made her the meaning of his days, the center of his being. And now, without her presence, he feels like a ghost. He fears that without her he is nothing, because he made her into his soul. He made her the flame by which he warmed himself. He made her the meaning of his days, the center of his being. And now, without her presence, he feels like a ghost. This is the cost of possession, the loss of self. But beneath this loss there is a deeper current, a secret door, because what he called love was always a mirror. She showed him the softness he thought he had lost, the tenderness, the mystery, the ache to be seen, to be held. She reminded him of the boy he once was, the dreamer, the artist, the romantic. And when she left, he believed that all of that left with her. But the anima was never hers to carry. She was his. She lives in his breath, in his bones, in his dreams. She is not a woman. She is a bridge to the self, to the soul. And now the bridge has collapsed, and he must swim through the dark waters of grief, through the storm of obsession, through the illusions he once mistook for truth. He must meet the anima where she was, born in the unconscious. She is no longer an image in another's eyes. She becomes a whisper in his solitude, a shimmer in his dreams, a flicker of light in the depths of sorrow. He begins to remember who he was before he gave her away. Before, he cast his inner feminine into the world, hoping someone else would carry what he feared to hold. And this remembering is painful, because it reveals how much he abandoned himself. Not because he was weak, but because he was unconscious, because the psyche seeks wholeness, and when it cannot find it within, it projects it outward. But now he knows. The spell is broken, and the Anima begins to return, not as seduction, but as soul, not as fantasy, but as feeling. She emerges in his gentleness, in his tears, in his art. She speaks in his longing for beauty, in his reverence for life, in his capacity to feel without control. She no longer demands a woman to carry her. She lives within him now. And this is the shift. This is the turning point from obsession to integration. The anima, once externalized, becomes internalized. She ceases to be a projection and becomes a companion, not a possession, not a prison, but a presence. This presence changes everything. He no longer needs to chase women to feel whole. He no longer needs to be adored to feel alive. He no longer needs the fantasy of the perfect other to escape the reality of his own soul. He has met her within. And in that meeting, he begins to transform. This is the path of individuation, the sacred journey towards psychological wholeness. It is the calling of every soul to reclaim what was projected, to withdraw the gods from the world and let them live within. The obsession fades, not because the feelings vanish, but because the fire has found its true home. He no longer burns for her, he burns with her. She, the anima, becomes the flame within his chest, illuminating his path, inspiring his art, guiding his transformation. He honors the women he meets now, not as carriers of his soul, but as sovereign beings. He loves, but he does not possess. He feels, but he does not collapse. He sees beauty, and he lets it live without needing it to complete him, because he is no longer possessed. He is no longer haunted. He is whole. The anima, once lost in the world, has come home, and in that reunion, a new life begins. Not the life of a man obsessed with what he has lost, but of a man in love with what he has found within. There is a kind of pain that is not a cry for help, but a cry for rebirth. It does not scream. It hums, low and constant, like a sacred wound wrapped in silence. It doesn't beg to be numbed. It waits to be known. This is not ordinary suffering. This is soul pain, and it is holy. He doesn't yet know this. He only feels the ache, the obsession looping like a slow-burning fever. The questions that circle endlessly. Why did she leave? What did I do? What could I have done differently? But beneath these questions lies a deeper gravity, a truth that no answer will ever resolve, because this wound is not about her. It is about him. He bleeds like the fisher king of myth, wounded not in the flesh but in the soul. His kingdom too begins to wither. Days feel pale. The world loses its color. Joy turns thin. Everything becomes echo, and yet, within that echo, something stirs. The wound begins to speak, not in words but in symbols, in dreams, in the sudden stillness between thoughts. It whispers through the feeling of collapse, of falling inward. And slowly the man begins to suspect. He is not dying. He is descending. This is the beginning of nigredo, the blackening, the first stage of the alchemical opus, the breaking apart, the rot, the death of what no longer serves. And like the ancient alchemists who believed that lead must first decay before it turns to gold, his soul has entered the furnace. The obsession, then, is not failure. It is fire, not to burn him alive, but to burn him clean. He resists at first, as all do. The ego clings, gasping, scrambling to rebuild the lost image. It bargains, it fantasizes about return, it romanticizes the past. But no reconstruction will hold. The psyche does not lie. It knows this pain is purposeful, and so he is left with only one choice: to descend, to walk willingly into the wound, to bow before the altar of heartbreak, not to be saved, but to be broken open, because some truths can only be revealed when the ego has shattered. This is what the ancient myths tried to tell us, that the hero must fall before he can rise, that the sword of transformation is forged in blood and silence, that the grail is found not in conquest, but in surrender. He is not weak for hurting. He is not broken for longing. He is being called. Through her absence, the self is summoning him into the deepest temple, the inner sanctum where the soul remakes itself. This pain is initiatory. It is the dark night of the psyche, the crucifixion before resurrection, the cocoon before the wings tear through. And like all sacred initiations, it demands that he lose who he thought he was, the lover, the desirable one, the man who believed he could possess what was never his to keep. It asks him to die, not in body, but in identity, to let go of the man who needed her to feel whole, to grieve not just her loss, but the collapse of his inner scaffolding, the persona he built to be loved, the armor he wore to feel enough, all of it dissolving. This is grief beyond romance. This is grief for the soul. The man wanders now in an inner wasteland, a desert of meaning, a place where even memory becomes dust. He is neither who he was nor who he is becoming. He walks as a liminal being, a chrysalis not yet cracked, and this between, is sacred. It is terrifying. It is lonely. But it is sacred because here in the dark he is being remade. The wound itself is the passage. It draws him inward like a spiral staircase into the unconscious. Each step down takes him closer to the source of his suffering and to the source of his transformation. He begins to see that the obsession was never about control. It was a smoke signal, a flare from the soul, a sacred alarm that something vital was missing, not in her, but in him. And now the search turns inward. He asks deeper questions, not how do I get her back, but what part of me have I lost? Not what did she take, but what did I give away? And as he asks, the alchemy begins. Jung taught that the wound is where the light enters. But before the light, there is blackness, nigredo, confusion, emptiness. He feels it all, the rage, the shame, the despair. These are not enemies, they are materials. alchemical matter to be cooked in the fire of attention. He does not resist them anymore. He sits with them, feeds them his breath, offers them patience, and slowly something shifts. The pain, once unbearable, becomes intimate. The wound, once gaping, becomes a doorway, not outward to another woman, but inward to the self. And here, at last, he begins to glimpse a new kind of power, not dominance, not conquest, but depth, the power of presence, the power of truth, the power that comes when a man no longer flees from himself. Through the wound, he sees now how much of his life was built on avoidance, how much he chased pleasure to numb fear, how often he used love as a mask, and how deeply he feared being with himself without distraction, without performance. But now the distraction is gone, and what remains is rawness, nakedness, soul, and the soul is not ashamed. It never was. It was simply waiting for the mask to crack, for the defenses to fall, for the man to return, not as a hero, not as a lover, but as himself. He's not healed, not yet. That is not the point. The point is that he is here, present to the wound, willing to learn its language, no longer pushing it away. This is the transformation, not dramatic, not loud, but holy, subtle, patient, real. The obsession dissolves, not because the longing disappears, but because it transforms into reverence. He no longer clings to what was. He honors it, he grieves it, and he lets it go. Like ashes returned to the earth, the feminine, once lost in her image, now lives in his depths. The pain, once unbearable, now births a kind of stillness, a dignity, a truth too vast for words, and in that stillness, the first glimmers of light appear, not from above, but from within, like embers glowing beneath the ashes, like a voice that whispers, "You are becoming not someone new, but someone whole." The alchemists called this the beginning of albedo, the whitening, the stage after blackness, after dissolution. It does not arrive with fanfare. It arrives quietly, as the moment. He realizes he has survived, not just the breakup, but himself. He has walked through his own fire, and though he is not yet finished, he is no longer lost. He sees now that the wound was not the end of him. It was the beginning. And perhaps this was always the purpose of her leaving, not to punish him, not to abandon him, but to awaken him, to draw him down into the place he had forgotten, the temple of the soul, where the true work begins. Not to love her again, but to love what he abandoned long ago, to remember the boy, the dreamer, the artist, the mystic, the wild heart, to call him back, to make space for him again, and to let the wound, like a sacred scar, mark the place of his becoming, not with shame, but with reverence, because this pain was not meaningless, it was mythic. It was the soul saying, "It is time." There comes a moment when the mirror no longer reflects, when the face a man has learned to wear, the smile, the charm, the certainty, crumbles like ash in the wind. And beneath that ash, something naked stirs, something raw, something real. This is the death of the persona. It is not a violent death. It does not come with fire or fury. It comes quietly, as all truths do, through a gaze withdrawn, through a silence that no longer affirms, through a woman who once saw him, or seemed to, and now does not. She walks away. But what collapses is not just the relationship. It is the mask, the one he wore for her, and for so many others, he does not realize it at first. All he knows is that something feels shattered, something inside him, long held together by validation, begins to dissolve. He feels unmoored, untethered, invisible, and it terrifies him, because the persona is not just an image, it is survival. It is the role he learned to play in order to be loved, wanted, admired. It is the crafted version of himself that knows how to smile even when hollow, that knows how to say the right thing, become the right thing, be the right thing. But that version is not the self. It is a costume worn in the theater of desire, and when the lights go out, when love no longer reflects him back to himself, that costume no longer fits. The woman is gone, and with her, the echo chamber he mistook for. Intimacy, no more approval, no more gaze, no more reflection to confirm, I am enough, and so the persona begins to die. At first, he fights it. He tries harder, reaches out, performs more, turns himself inside out to win her gaze again. He thinks, if she sees me again, I will feel real. Again. But she does not see because the mask no longer works, and this is the hidden grace of rejection. It strips away what is false. The pain is not just heartbreak, it is ego death. The kind that peels back the curated self he spent years building. The charming boy, the strong provider, the spiritual man, the mysterious lover. All the roles collapse in a heap of forgotten scripts, and standing among the wreckage is someone he does not fully recognize, the unmasked one, the true one, not yet whole, not yet healed, but undeniably present. And he is terrified of him because the persona protected him. It was his armor. It kept the world at a safe distance. It let him navigate relationships without ever being fully seen. It made him lovable, at least on the surface. But now, without the performance, he feels naked. Without her gaze, he feels invisible, and that is the deeper wound. Not that she left, but that without her seeing him, he no longer knows how to see himself. This is the danger of a life built through reflection. When the mirror leaves, so does the sense of self. And yet, this is also the threshold. The soul does not grow in performance, it grows in presence. The persona must die for the self to emerge. This death is not easy. It is a psychic unthreading. He begins to notice how much of his identity was shaped by external approval. How many times he laughed to be accepted, how often he betrayed his truth to be desired, how deeply he feared being ordinary, unremarkable, real, because the real felt unworthy. So he became what others needed, especially what she needed, or so he thought. He was the ideal man, or tried to be, attentive, romantic, mysterious. But beneath it all was a desperation, to be seen as enough, and when she walked away, that desperation turned to despair. But the soul sees deeper. It sees that the collapse of the persona is sacred. It is not punishment, it is purification. Jung said, "The persona is what one is not, but what oneself and others think one is." And now he sees it. He sees how far he drifted from himself to maintain the illusion. And in that seeing, something softens. He stops performing. There is no one left to impress, no audience, just the quiet aftermath of the fall. And in that quiet, he begins to feel something he had long forgotten. Honesty. Not the kind spoken aloud, but the kind that lives in the bones. The kind that can sit in silence without shrinking. The kind that no longer asks, "Am I enough?" Because it already knows I am. Not because of who wants me, not because of how well I perform, but because I exist. And this is resurrection, not of the persona, but of the self. The man begins to speak less, move slower. He listens to his breath, to the spaces inside him he once drowned in noise. He stops trying to be interesting or deep or clever. He allows himself to be simple, to be real, to be. And this being feels foreign at first. He is so used to the armor. But each time he chooses presence over performance, he feels lighter. The obsession fades not into apathy, but into clarity. He no longer wants her to see him. He wants to see himself. He begins to ask, "Who am I?" when no one is watching. Who am I when there is no reward? Who am I without applause? And in these questions he rediscovers the boy, the one who danced without needing a stage, the one who loved the world not to earn love back, but because his heart was open, the one who cried without shame, who dreamed without filters, who was without needing to become. And he weeps, not for her, but for himself, for the years spent behind the mask, for the truth he buried beneath desire, for the love he gave from emptiness. And the tears are not weakness, they are washing. They cleanse the fragments of the persona that no longer serve, and in their place grows something tender, integrity, not perfection. Not performance, but alignment. He no longer needs to be someone, he is, and in this being he becomes trustworthy to himself. He no longer manipulates to be seen, no longer abandons himself to be accepted. He shows up, imperfect, honest, alive, and the soul rejoices, because this unraveling, this death, is not the end. It is the chrysalis breaking. It is the false self returning to dust. It is the beginning of wholeness, and wholeness does not seek to be desired. It seeks to be known, not by others, but by the self. And so the mask lies forgotten now. He does not need it. The mirror is gone, and in its absence, he finally sees. At night she returns, not as she was, but as something more, something larger, terrible, beautiful, impossible to hold. She enters not through the door, but through the dream. She rises like smoke from the unconscious, wearing 1,000 forms, sometimes soft, sometimes savage, sometimes radiant with light, sometimes cloaked in shadow. She is everywhere now, in the mirrors, in the wind, in the aching silence between. It breaths, and the man no longer knows where she ends and he begins. For in sleep, the psyche speaks in images, symbols, stories older than words. And now, in the quiet dark, she begins to speak, not the woman herself, but the feminine within him, the anima, unbound by flesh. She appears as a lover, then a ghost, then a serpent, coiling in his chest. She whispers in languages he does not understand, but feels in the blood. And he wakes each morning drenched in mystery. These are not merely dreams, they are summons, invitations from the unconscious to enter deeper, to see not just the woman who left, but the archetype she activated. For she was never only herself, she was the portal, the psychic gateway, the flame that lit the cave of his own soul. And now that flame has become wildfire. He dreams of her eyes turning black, of her mouth opening wide enough to swallow him whole. He dreams of drowning in her body, of being torn apart by desire. He dreams of her holding him like a mother, then vanishing into mist. The psyche is not subtle, it does not care for logic. It only speaks what is true. And now the truth is this: he is possessed, not by her, but by the image of her, by the inner feminine. Rising in revolt, he does not control these visions. They erupt, they command, and each time he tries to rationalize them, they shift shape. They demand not understanding, but surrender, because these dreams are not delusions, they are revelations. The siren who calls him to the edge of himself, the goddess who demands reverence, not conquest, the devourer who consumes the ego with a single glance. Each is a face of the anima, each is a mirror of his own longing. But this longing is not for her body, her presence, her return. It is for reunion with the lost feminine within. Himself, for too long, he banished her. In his psyche she was reduced to shadow, to fantasy, to fear, to obsession. He projected her onto women, needing them to carry what he would not. He needed her to mother him, to affirm him, to save him. But now she appears not as salvation but as storm, and it is in this storm that he begins to feel, truly feel, not just the ache of absence, but the deeper grief, the grief of disconnection from his own soul. Because the anima is not a dream figure, she is soul image, the living bridge between his conscious life and the mystery beneath. She is eros, creativity, depth. She is the wellspring of meaning, and when she is repressed, when her voice is silenced or distorted, she returns with fire, not to punish, but to awaken, and so she does, in dreams that break him open, in fantasies that reveal his hunger, not just for love, but for life, in visions that crack the mask and show him what he truly is beneath the surface. He dreams again. This time, she is weeping, her hands covered in blood. He kneels before her, unsure whether to flee or comfort her, but he stays, and in staying, something shifts. He is no longer running from the dream. He is listening to it, feeling it, allowing it to show him what he has feared to see, and he begins to understand. These are not erotic hallucinations or psychic torments. These are teachings. She comes now as teacher, and her lessons are not easy, because they ask him to see what he has rejected. The feminine not as ideal or object, but as force, a force that creates and destroys, a force that births and devours. He dreams again. She is ancient now, dressed in black, standing at the threshold of a door he does not want to open. She speaks without sound. Come through. He hesitates. The ego trembles, because he knows, if he walks through, he cannot return unchanged. This is the archetypal initiation. To descend into the depths of the feminine abyss, not to conquer it, but to be claimed by it. He begins to see the pattern now, how the psyche is using dreams as ritual, how every night in the theater of the unconscious, a sacred drama unfolds. And he is both audience and actor, witness and sacrifice. Each dream is a death, each awakening a rebirth, and slowly he stops clinging to the waking world for comfort. He begins to trust the symbols, to take them seriously. He journals them, speaks them aloud, not as puzzles to solve, but as messages to feel. He reads the old myths of Inanna's descent, of Persephone's abduction, of the sea sirens who lured Odysseus with song. He sees now these are not just stories. They are maps, maps of the psyche, maps of his own journey into the underworld, because the feminine abyss is not emptiness, it is fullness, so vast and wild it terrifies the mind. It threatens all false order, all rigid structure, all masculine attempts to control or define, but he no longer wishes to control. He wishes to know, to feel, to be transformed. And the Anima, now feeling his sincerity, softens. She returns in dreams, but gentler now, sometimes as a child, sometimes as a deer in the woods, sometimes as a light just beyond reach. She is no longer monstrous. She is becoming whole again, because he is no longer afraid, and in this fearlessness, a new longing is born, not to possess her, but to unite with her within himself. This is not romance, this is alchemy, the sacred union of masculine and feminine within the soul. Jung called it conjunctio, the alchemical marriage. It does not require another person. It requires inner balance, integration. He begins to feel that balance, not always, not fully, but sometimes. In moments of stillness, of creativity, of presence, the obsession is quiet now. The fantasy has become symbol. He no longer dreams to escape. He dreams to remember, and in remembering, he reclaims. The Anima no longer lives only in his desire. She lives in his breath, in his gaze, in his capacity to feel without collapsing, to create without agenda, to speak without needing to impress. This is the gift of the abyss. It strips the man down, not to destroy, but to restore, to return him to what he always was, beneath the masks, a soul, capable of depth, capable of love, not because he is needed, but because he is whole. And so, the dreams continue, not as torment, but as guide, not as fantasy, but as fire, and the man, once obsessed, now walks with reverence. For he knows the woman he longed for was never outside of him. She was the dream, calling him home. There is a hunger that speaks louder than the heart. It cries not for love, but for survival, and in the echoing aftermath of her departure it howls. The ego, fragile, frightened, and famished, clings to her memory like a castaway to driftwood, not because she was sanctuary, but because she was a mirror. And now, with that mirror shattered, it sees nothing but its own emptiness. This is not grief, this is starvation. The soul aches, yes, but it aches with wisdom. The ego, however, aches with desperation. It does not want to heal, it wants to be restored. Restored to the illusion that it was enough, desirable, complete, significant. It seeks not reunion with the self, but reanimation of the lie that someone else can save it from itself. And so the obsession grows, not out of love, but out of lack. Each memory of her is chewed like old bread. Each moment replayed, not to understand, but to feed. To feel something, anything, that confirms he was once wanted, once chosen, once seen. The ego feeds on reflection. Without it, it begins to dissolve. It cannot tolerate the void. And so, it builds fantasy in her image. It constructs a cathedral of nostalgia, placing her on its altar. But the altar is not devotion, it is desperation. It is the shrine of the unhealed child, still aching to be held, still waiting to be told he matters. He does not want her back. He wants himself back, as he was in her eyes. But this too is illusion, because what she reflected was not always truth. It was often performance, and yet the ego does not care. It only wants the high, the drug of approval, the sweetness of validation that made the mask feel real. It is not the woman that breaks him. It is what she took with her when she left, his constructed self, his projected worth, the image he curated to be loved. Now in her absence, that image flickers, and the ego panics. It begins its bargaining, its ritual, its schemes. It writes texts never sent. It stalks social shadows. It crafts stories where he is the wronged, the wounded, the righteous. But beneath all of it is one primal cry: please, someone want me. This is the ego's deepest wound. Not rejection, but insignificance. Not the loss of love, but the loss of being chosen. For the ego believes, if I am not chosen, I am not real. And this belief runs deep. It is not born in romance. It is born in childhood, in the places where affection was earned, not given, in the rooms where praise was a reward for performance, in the gaze that only lingered when he behaved, succeeded, shone. The ego, forged in those fires, learned to become what others desired, to mold itself to survive. And now it faces the unbearable truth that no amount of external validation can fill the hole it hides, because the hole is not in the world, it is in him. And so the soul invites him deeper, to turn away from obsession and toward origin, to ask, not why she left, but why he cannot let go, to ask, not why he aches for her, but why he aches at all. And the answer is not romantic. It is existential. He has built his sense of worth upon sand, upon fleeting glances, temporary touch, conditional acceptance. He has outsourced his belonging, and now he must call it home. The ego will resist. It will scream that this is death, and in some ways it is not physical death, but symbolic death, the death of the hunger. The ego does not want to die. It will seduce him with memory, with fantasy, with the mirage, that if only she returned, all would be well. But the soul knows better. It knows this is the wound that births the self, that behind the ache is the invitation. To feed, not on others. Love, but on one's own essence. To drink not from the cup of validation, but from the wellspring within. But to do this, he must starve the ego, not in cruelty, but in discipline. He must say no to the obsession, no to the fixation. No to the fantasy that she holds his wholeness, because she does not. She never did. She only mirrored what was already there, and now, without the mirror, he must find it himself. This is the holy fast, the sacred starvation. To turn inward in the absence of praise, to love himself in the silence, to witness his being not because she saw it, but because it exists, because it breathes, because it is. And as the ego is denied its feast, something else awakens, something quieter, something deeper, a presence beneath the hunger, a watcher behind the ache. He begins to observe himself, not as victim, not as abandoned, but as becoming. He sees the grasping, the ache for approval, the longing to be special, and he does not judge it, he blesses it, because even the hunger was sacred. It brought him here, to this reckoning, to this remembrance, that he was never meant to be completed by another. He was meant to be revealed, and revelation does not come through being chosen, it comes through choosing to see his worth without a witness, choosing to stand without applause, choosing to feel the ache without running from it. And in that choice the hunger shifts. It no longer controls him. It becomes teacher. He speaks to it now, gently. "I see you," he says. "You wanted to be loved, you wanted to matter, and the hunger softens because it has been seen, and in that seeing, the ego loosens its grip. It no longer needs to be fed, it needs to be healed. This is the path of individuation, the sacred return to self, not as isolation, but as wholeness. Jung taught, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And now he understands. He was never meant to be a reflection. He was meant to be a flame, not burning for others, but burning with presence, with soul, with essence. The obsession fades, not into indifference, but into truth. He no longer needs her. To see him, he sees himself, and this sight is not grand. It is simple, it is soft, it is enough. He sits now with the hunger, not feeding it, not fleeing it, but holding it like a child, like a part of him long exiled. And in that embrace, something alchemical occurs. The hunger becomes fullness, the grasping becomes stillness, the ego, once starving, becomes quiet, not gone, but no longer in command. It has surrendered, and in its surrender, the soul rises, whole, radiant, home. In the quiet aftermath of obsession, when the soul's fever begins to cool, a subtle shift occurs. It is as if the very currents of the psyche, once swept by the relentless tide of desire, now find themselves turning, not away from the sea, but toward a new horizon. This is enantiodromia, the turning of the tide. Carl Jung, drawing from the ancient wisdom of Heraclitus, spoke of this principle. Sooner or later, everything runs into its opposite. In the realm of the psyche, this means that when a force becomes too dominant, the unconscious compensates, bringing forth its opposite to restore balance. You have journeyed through the storm of obsession, clinging to the memory of her like a shipwrecked sailor to a fragment of driftwood, but now the storm subsides. The waves that once crashed with fury now lap gently at the shore. The winds that howled with longing now whisper of release. This turning is not a rejection, but a return to yourself. The ego, once consumed by the need to possess, now faces the mirror of its own emptiness. The hunger that drove you outward now turns inward, not to consume but to understand. In this stillness, the shadow emerges, not as an adversary but as a guide. It is the part of you that was overshadowed by the light of obsession, now stepping into the fullness of the sun. The shadow, once repressed, now offers its wisdom, its depth, its truth. The persona too begins to dissolve. The masks you wore to be seen, to be loved, to be desired, now slip away. Without her gaze to reflect your image, you stand naked before yourself. This is not a loss, but a liberation. For in shedding the false self, the true self can emerge. The Anima, the inner feminine, no longer appears as the object of your longing, but as the subject of your own psyche. She is not separate from you, but a part of you, a reflection of your own soul. In her, you see not what you desire, but what you are. This turning is the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming whole. It is the integration of opposites, the reconciliation of the conscious and unconscious, the merging of the ego and the self. It is the alchemical transformation from lead to gold, from fragmentation to unity. But this journey is not without its challenges. The ego resists the dissolution of its illusions. The persona clings to its roles. The shadow, once ignored, now demands attention. Yet, in facing these aspects, you reclaim your power. You no longer seek validation from without, but from within. In this new clarity, you begin to see the world not as a reflection of your desires, but as it truly is. The projections that once colored your perception now fade, revealing the richness of reality. You are no longer a prisoner of your own mind, but a master of your own soul. This turning is not an end, but a beginning. It is the dawn of a new consciousness, a new way of being. It is the awakening from the dream of separation into the reality of unity. And so you stand at the threshold of transformation, not as a seeker of the feminine, but as the embodiment of the masculine. You are both the lover and the beloved, the seeker and the sought. In this union you find yourself. The tide has turned, the storm has passed, the sea is calm. And in the stillness you hear the whisper of your own soul. You are whole, you are enough. In the quiet aftermath of obsession, when the soul's fever begins to cool, a subtle shift occurs. It is as if the very currents of the psyche, once swept by the relentless tide of desire, now find themselves turning not away from the sea, but toward a new horizon. This is enantiodromia, the turning of the tide. Carl Jung, drawing from the ancient wisdom of Heraclitus, spoke of this principle. Sooner or later, everything runs into its opposite. In the realm of the psyche, this means that when a force becomes too dominant, the unconscious compensates, bringing forth its opposite to restore balance. Enantiodromia is the emergence of the unconscious opposite in the course of time. It is the principle that when an extreme, one-sided tendency dominates conscious life, an equally powerful counterposition builds up, first inhibiting the conscious performance and subsequently breaking through the conscious control. Wikipedia, you have journeyed through the storm of obsession, clinging to the memory of her like a shipwrecked sailor to a fragment of driftwood. But now the storm subsides. The waves that once crashed with fury now lap gently at the shore. The winds that howled with longing now whisper of release. This turning is not a rejection but a return to yourself. The ego, once consumed by the need to possess, now faces the mirror of its own emptiness. The hunger that drove you outward now turns inward, not to consume, but to understand. In this stillness, the shadow emerges, not as an adversary, but as a guide. It is the part of you that was overshadowed by the light of obsession, now stepping into the fullness of the sun. The shadow, once repressed, now offers its wisdom, its depth, its truth. The persona, too, begins to dissolve. The masks you wore to be seen, to be loved, to be desired, now slip away. Without her gaze to reflect your image, you stand naked before yourself. This is not a loss, but a liberation. For in shedding the false self, the true self can emerge. The Anima, the inner feminine, no longer appears as the object of your longing, but as the subject of your own psyche. She is not separate from you, but a part of you, a reflection of your own soul. In her, you see not what you desire, but what you are. This turning is the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming whole. It is the integration of opposites, the reconciliation of the conscious and unconscious, the merging of the ego and the self. It is the alchemical transformation, from lead to gold, from fragmentation to unity. But this journey is not without its challenges. The ego resists the dissolution of its illusions. The persona clings to its roles. The shadow, once ignored, now demands attention. Yet, in facing these aspects, you reclaim your power. You no longer seek validation from without, but from within. In this new clarity, you begin to see the world not as a reflection of your desires, but as it truly is. The projections that once colored your perception now fade, revealing the richness of reality. You are no longer a prisoner of your own mind, but a master of your own soul. This turning is not an end, but a beginning. It is the dawn of a new consciousness, a new way of being. It is the awakening from the dream of separation into the reality of unity. And so you stand at the threshold of transformation, not as a seeker of the feminine, but as the embodiment of the masculine. You are both the lover and the beloved, the seeker and the sought. In this union you find yourself. The tide has turned, the storm has passed, the sea is calm, and in the stillness you hear the whisper of your own soul. You are whole. You are enough. In the quiet crucible of grief, the soul begins its slow, trembling stirring. Like dawn breaking softly over a still sea, light seeps into the dark waters of the unconscious, illuminating what was once shadowed and fractured. The self, vast and ancient, awakens from its dormant slumber, no longer torn apart by the cruel fractures of projection. It is here, in this sacred chamber of silence and sorrow, that the long journey of integration begins. Imagine the psyche as a shattered vessel, once whole but fractured by the sharp edges of loss and longing. Each shard glints with pain, reflecting a piece of the story once held dear, now lost in the shifting tides of absence. Yet within this breaking, a deeper alchemy unfolds. The shattered parts, though separated, call to one another across the abyss, drawn by a silent magnetism of wholeness. This is the paradox of our inner transformation. Through breaking, we begin to mend. Through descent, we ascend. The anima, the inner feminine, once seen only through the lens of yearning and fantasy, no longer appears as a distant star to chase across the night sky. Instead, she returns as a guide from within, a luminous presence leading the masculine psyche through its labyrinth. No longer a mirage of desire, she is the living voice of the unconscious, the whisper of the soul's deepest wisdom. Her light, soft yet unwavering, reveals the path through the shadows, inviting the ego to step beyond its narrow confines. This moment is the albedo, the whitening, the emergence of new light after the nigredo's blackness. In the language of alchemy, it is the washing away of old illusions, the purification of the spirit, the clarity that follows the night of the soul. The blackness that once engulfed now recedes, giving way to a pale, clear radiance. It is the dawn after the long, harrowing night, a dawn born not from denial, but from acceptance. Grief, often misunderstood as a prison, becomes here the fertile soil of rebirth. Like the phoenix reduced to ashes, the soul is laid bare, stripped of all pretense and false selves. The ego, humbled and softened, ceases its desperate grasping for validation beyond itself. It begins to listen, to the quiet voice of the self, to the steady pulse of the deeper being beneath the waves of feeling and thought. In this sacred alchemy, the ego and the self do not oppose, but embrace, weaving together their disparate threads into a new tapestry of meaning. The fractured psyche finds its axis once more, grounded not in outer reflection, but in inner truth. The masculine no longer seeks to possess the feminine, but honors her as a vital aspect of its own wholeness. Here, individuation reveals itself, not as a distant goal, but as a living process, an unfolding dance between light and shadow, presence and absence, death and rebirth. The soul learns that to be whole is not to be perfect, but to hold all parts, the broken and the healed, in a compassionate embrace. This is the moment when the self remembers itself, not as a fragment yearning for completion, but as a radiant center, a luminous source from which all life flows. It is a rebirth into authenticity, a resurrection from the symbolic death that obsession had wrought. The journey continues deeper now, with a new rhythm and grace. The dark waters have given birth to light, and the soul moves forward, not as a seeker lost in longing, but as a traveler guided by the steady flame of inner knowing. In this sacred dawn, you stand reborn, whole and unafraid, the mystery of the self unfolding endlessly within you. In the vast, silent chamber of the soul, a quiet reckoning unfolds, one that surpasses the restless yearning for another and turns inward toward a profound reconciliation. The obsession, once a consuming fire, burning outward, now begins to dissolve like mist before the morning sun. This fire, born of longing and fracture, no longer needs to seek its extinguishing in the gaze of another, for the true union waits patiently in the depths, within the self itself. Imagine the psyche as a sacred temple, its walls adorned with the mosaics of light and shadow, where the masculine and feminine archetypes, long estranged, now approach each other across the divide. The anima, the inner feminine, once exiled to the realm of dreams and projections, steps forward with a gentle radiance. She's no longer a phantom to be chased or feared, but a presence to be embraced, a lost bride returned home. The animus, the masculine principle within the feminine soul, mirrors this return, and between them arises the hieros gamos, the sacred marriage, the holy union. This mythic alchemy transcends earthly attachments and dissolves the false dichotomies that have torn the psyche apart. The ego, often rigid and fragmented, opens to the vastness of the self, that great and unknowable center where all opposites reconcile. This is not a union of mere desire or dependency, but a fusion of essences, a meeting where the soul's divided halves find completion within their own wholeness. Here, the archetypes of masculine and feminine do not battle or dominate. They dance, entwined in an eternal embrace, weaving threads of understanding, compassion, and strength. Symbolically, this sacred marriage echoes the ancient rites, the mysteries where the king and queen unite to renew the land and bring forth life. Within the inner world, this union restores the fractured psyche, healing the wounds of separation and loss. It is the rebirth of wholeness, where the self shines forth as a luminous beacon in the night. Through this integration, the shadow ceases to be a lurking enemy and becomes a vital part of the dance, its dark texture lending depth and contour to the emerging light. The persona, once a mask of survival and performance, gently falls away, revealing the radiant core beneath, authentic, vulnerable, and strong. The soul, once divided by the tempest of obsession and yearning, now knows peace. The masculine no longer chases the elusive feminine outside, for she lives within, embodied, alive, and whole. This inner marriage is the alchemical wedding, the conjunctio, where opposites fuse and the true gold of the psyche is revealed. In this sacred union, the ego becomes a willing servant of the self, no longer tyrannizing or fragmenting the souls. A vast landscape, the archetypal lovers, animus and anima, guide the journey toward a deeper, more profound harmony, teaching the ego to walk the path of humility and grace. It is a moment of profound transformation. The chrysalis breaks open, and the soul takes flight, its wings painted with the colors of both night and dawn. The inner marriage is not an end, but a beginning, a continuous dance of integration, shadow and light, death and rebirth. The fire of obsession cools into the steady flame of devotion, to the self, to truth, to the mysterious unfolding of the soul's destiny. Here, in this sacred space within, the true union was always waiting, the marriage of all that we are, at last whole and free. The soul breathes deep, knowing itself as one, infinite and complete. The moment arrives, soft yet resolute, a gentle unraveling of what once seemed indispensable, a letting go that is not loss, but sacred liberation. She, the image held so tightly in the heart's grasp, now fades from the obsessive gaze, not as abandonment, but as a reverent release, a bow to the eternal flow of transformation. To let her go is to step beyond the shadows cast by desire, beyond the chains of fixation, into the vast openness of the self's own becoming. This release is no forgetting. It is an honoring, a deep acknowledgement of what she symbolized. The call of the inner feminine, the mirror of longing, the bearer of dreams, and the keeper of mysteries. She is the echo of the Anima's voice, once projected outward in the yearning for union, now embraced within as a guiding presence, not a possession. She becomes a sacred emblem on the path inward, the threshold to the self, waiting patiently beyond the veil, in the quiet wilderness of the soul, where shadows blend with light. The ego learns the art of surrender. The hunger that once drove him toward another dissolves into a deeper hunger, the hunger to become whole in himself. This is the true individuation, the shedding of illusions, the death of the fragmented persona, and the awakening to a soul that is neither lost nor found in another, but discovered in the sanctuary within. He walks forward now, not to capture or cling, but to embody the fullness of his being. Each step is a baptism, a passage from the world of possession to the world of presence. The chains fall away, and in their place, wings unfold, wings not of escape, but of grounded, luminous freedom. The journey is complete, not as an end, but as a circle closing to open anew. The self, once splintered by projection and desire, stands whole, radiant in the light of inner reconciliation. The Anima's face, once fragmented and feared, smiles from within, a companion and guide rather than a distant star. The sacred paradox reveals itself. To truly find, one must first release. To possess is to be enslaved. To surrender is to be free. In letting go of her, he finds himself, not in absence, but in profound presence. The soul's journey has passed through the storm of obsession, the descent into shadow, the sacred union, and finally, the quiet grace of release. This is the path of the mystic, the alchemist of the inner world, who knows that true power lies in humility and the courage to stand alone, yet not lonely. Like the phoenix rising from ashes, the ego is reborn, not as master, but as servant. Of the self, the anima, no longer an object, becomes the life breath of his inner world, the pulse of creative wholeness. The flame of longing cools into the steady light of being. Here, in this sacred space of letting go, the soul whispers its ancient truth. Wholeness is not found by seeking outside, but by embracing the totality within. The journey outward was but a reflection of the voyage inward, a voyage that ends in the eternal embrace of the self. He steps forward into the unfolding dawn, a man transformed, not by possession, but by the sacred art of release. In this letting go, he is free. In this freedom, he is whole. And thus the circle closes, the journey ends, and the soul sings its quiet song of completion and infinite beginnings. Description. In this profound exploration, we journey through the sacred terrain of loss, obsession, and the alchemical process of inner transformation. What begins as the heartbreak of a departing beloved unfolds into a mythic descent, a symbolic death where the ego's fragile constructions shatter like glass, revealing the shadow and the anima beneath. This is no ordinary grief. It is the psyche's invitation to awaken, to face the fragmented self hidden in projection and longing. Drawing deeply from Jung's teachings, we witness the dissolution of outer fixation and the painful emergence of the inner feminine, no longer as an external mirror, but as a living presence within the soul. The story echoes the ancient myths of descent and rebirth, where loss is not an end, but a sacred summons to individuation. In this quiet, liminal space, the psyche begins to weave the sacred marriage of animus and anima, shadow and light, creating the crucible for wholeness and renewal. The ego, humbled and stripped bare, learns to surrender, not in defeat but in profound freedom. To let go is not forgetting, but embracing the eternal flow of transformation. Here, the soul finds its true home, radiant and whole. If you've ever wrestled with loss, longing, or the deep ache of the soul's fragmentation, this journey speaks to the sacred work beneath the pain, the path from obsession to freedom, from projection to presence. Share your reflections or your own experiences with the inner journey below. How has your soul called you through loss into deeper self-knowledge? Carl Jung, at his shadow work, Individuation, Anima and Animus, Jungian psychology, inner transformation, sacred marriage, psychological rebirth, projection and shadow, depth psychology.